So I take you now to the parable of the sower. In answer to the question, let me introduce it this way. I learned, probably many of you as well, that theologians like to think of the parable of the sower in this way. Anyone, or even when you get into any discussion about free will versus predestination, they like to say, the person that falls away was never a believer to begin with. And that aligns itself with predestination because that person wasn't predestined. He had this pretended relationship with the Almighty, and then something came along which drove him in a different direction, or he made a different choice, made some other decision, and he walked away and began to walk in the ways of the world again. And so they always, if you're stuck on that theological position of predestination, you have to make explanations on some of these passages that seem to very clearly contradict your position. And so the parable of the sower, I think, is an illustration of the answer to the question, who really is saved, who really has received the forgiveness of Elohim through a knowledge of the death of Yeshua and that kind of thing. Are these people really, were they really just pretending all along, and that eventually the result of that showed up and they were never believers to begin with? Paul makes a couple of statements in the book of Hebrews, we're going to look at one in a little while, that all seem to indicate that it's important that we persevere. We persevere, and that the promises that Elohim gave of blessing and inheritance are stipulated upon whether or not we're going to continue in the right way. Otherwise, we may fall away, and we'll look at that in a little bit. But the parable of the sower, the master talks about the same concept, and that's Matthew chapter 13. So, on that day, Yahushua went out of the house and sat by the sea, and large crowds were gathered together to him. And so that he went into a boat and sat down, and all the crowd stood on the beach. And he spoke to them much in parables, saying, "Look, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some indeed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them," the seeds, that is. "And others fell on rocky places where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, because they had no depth of soil. But when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered. And others fell among thorns, and the thorns came up and choked them. And others fell on good ground, good soil, yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear." I think we have ears to hear. So the summary of that is the 4 seeds. Some fell in the path where they never took root because it was a hard surface, and so the birds ate the seeds. Some of the seed fell on rocky places that sprung up but didn't have much soil, so they were withered by the sun and died. The plants died. Some fell among thorns that were choked, and yet other seed fell on good ground where it grew and produced a crop. So the taught ones came and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" And he answered and said, "Because it has been given to you to know the secrets of the reign of the heavens. But to them it has not been given. For whoever possesses, to him more shall be given, and he shall have overflowingly. But whoever does not possess, even what he possesses shall be taken away from him." And it's kind of that principle plays itself out when we hear righteous instruction and when we hear what the command of Elohim is, and if we decide not to do it, we're stuck right there. He's not going to give us more. Until we learn, we shema, and obey that instruction, then he'll give us more. so that he shall have, the one that continues to obey when he learns, shall have overflowingly. But whoever does not possess, in other words, isn't walking in the knowledge that he has, even what he possesses shall be taken away from him. So he's not going to get further revelation, and even an understanding of what he just failed to do and submit to is going to be taken away, and he's not going to remember anything. It's like, where did God go? Because of this I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. And in them the prophecy of Yeshayahu is completely fulfilled, which says, hearing you shall hear and by no means understand, and seeing you shall see and by no means perceive. For the heart of this people has become thickened, and their ears are hard of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their heart and turn back and I would heal them. So he spoke in parables so that the people that were inclined to listen and obey would listen and obey, but those who had hard hearts would ignore it. Maybe they wouldn't understand what he was saying, and they would just say, psh, whatever, and forget the teaching. And so the parable served a dual purpose of providing a means for the believing folks to believe and understand and move on, and for the unbelievers to get stuck in the mud, as it were. So the interpretation of the parable is in Matthew 13:18-23. You then hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the reign, the word of the kingdom, and does not understand it, and then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is that sown by the wayside, on the ground or on the road, where the seed didn't take root, because they have hardness of heart. They didn't understand. And that sown on rocky places, that this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. These are people that hear and ask Jesus into their heart because they see the benefit of having a relationship and the blessings of the Almighty. And yet he has no root in himself, but is short-lived, and when pressure or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles. So he doesn't persevere. He can't handle the pressure and the problems that come, that are there from the evil one to tempt us, or from the Almighty to test us, to see whether or not our faith is real and strong, and whether we're going to persevere through the problems and trials. And then the third one, that sown among the thorns, is he who hears the word, and the worry of this age and the deceit of riches choke the word, and it becomes fruitless. So he changes basically who his Elohim is. He decides to serve Mammon instead of Elohim. And so the word is choked and bears no fruit in him. And that sown on the good soil is he who hears the word and understands it, and indeed bears fruit and yields some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. So here we have different individuals in different circumstances. Numbers 2 and 3 received the word and began to grow. And for their various reasons, they stopped believing. They stopped moving forward in faith, and were choked off, and the life died in them. The life of the Spirit died. But the fourth one, of those people that heard the message, heard the word, and walked in it, and continued to persevere, these are the ones that bore fruit. So I think that's a good answer to those who would say, those people who professed faith in Jesus at some point in time fell away, they left the church, whatever, yada, yada. They were never believers to begin with. And yet that seems to contradict what Yeshua was saying here, that there are people that allow that word to begin to work in them, and yet for various reasons shut it off at some point in time. And then they lose their life. They lose, that forward-moving progress that Elohim wants to do in each one of us.
For more information, visit www.arthurbaileyministries.com or call 888-899-1479. This program is made possible through financial contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.